Hi, I'm Amy from Amy Designs, and today I'm here to walk you through the steps to create my framed heart mini quilt. And as a bonus, this mini quilt also comes with instructions to create both a 27-inch table topper and a larger 32-inch table topper. Both of these projects are super fun and easy and are a build on the heart block plus a 9-patch block. The larger one has the second row of sashing, the smaller one only has the inner row of sashing, and both make super fun accents for holidays, especially Valentine's Day. But if you change out the colors, I mean, hearts are good anytime, right? I just wanted to talk a little bit about color selection before we get started here. You want to make sure that your fabrics have plenty of contrast so that you can see all of the different layers of the blocks that you're putting together. So on this one, you can see that I have used a really dark red for the inner lining or the inner border, and then a medium red for the outer border and background, and then the white creates a very dramatic contrast. Pay attention to the scale of the fabrics that you're choosing, because if you're choosing a fabric that has a really large floral print, for example, that floral, while you might be expecting it to be white because when it's in a big piece, it reads white. If that big floral then becomes one of the main pieces or the white, the main selection for the piece that you're sewing together, you may lose the whiteness of it. And in that case, you would lose some of that contrast. So just make sure that you're paying attention to scale and size and colors and things like that to make sure that you're actually seeing all of your hard work, because there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a project and being like, oh, I really wish that would have shown up a little bit better. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is if you are making the tabletop version, you can orient the hearts two different ways. Now in this one, I knew I was going to have it be more of a wall hanging, and so all of my hearts are up and down. But on this larger version, I knew I wanted it to be a table topper, and so I wanted all of the hearts to point out from the center. And so I rotated the heart blocks just so that when you're sitting at a table, no matter how you're looking at it, the heart is right side up to you. The heart closest to you would be right side up. So that's just something to think about depending on what you're planning on using your mini quilt for. You may want to orient the hearts one way or the other. It doesn't change anything else about the directions other than just which way it points. All right, so now that we've talked about fabric selection and which way we're going to orient our hearts, let's get making our mini quilt. We're going to begin with our heart blocks. You will need your rectangular heart pieces, and then you will need your heart bottom and your heart top pieces. Now on your background pieces for your heart, for the bottom and the top, it's much simpler if you use a non-directional fabric, but if you have gone ahead and used a directional fabric for this, you will want to place your fabric right sides together and then flip down the corners to make sure that it's turned the right way when you go to flip those corners, so that so that the top is facing up, if that makes sense. You want to begin by drawing diagonal lines on the backs of your background pieces. You want to make sure that you have the diagonals going in opposite directions so that you're creating mirror images on the two halves of your heart. Now, again, because I'm using a non-directional fabric here, I can just mark them all the same way and then turn them. But if there's a definite right or wrong to your fabric, to the directionality of your background fabric, you will want to make sure that you are drawing them, top right to bottom left, top left to bottom right, so that they will mirror each other once they're sewn. You're going to repeat that for all of the background pieces, both the larger bottom pieces and the smaller top pieces. The next step is to take your heart piece and you are going to line up the background piece. And I like to start with the bottom just because it's fast and easy, and it's easy to make sure that the pieces are going opposite directions so that you can be paying attention as you're assembling them. So I will do one the same. So if I've drawn and I have like my drawn lines all going the same way, I will begin by going one direction on the first piece, and then I will make sure that I'm going the opposite direction on the second piece. That way I can make sure that my heart is going to have both sides, and I'm not going to make two of the same side. So the bottom piece is really the piece where that directionality happens. So you want to make sure, again, that your lines are going from the top right to the bottom left, and then the top left to the bottom right on the two pieces of your heart. And then you are going to sew right along that drawn line. And then you will cut away the extra fabric about 1/4 of an inch away from your sewn line. It can be a little scant here if you like, but it helps to reduce some of the bulk by trimming away the corner. Then you're going to take this to your iron and press it away. I do like to press this seam open. I feel like helps that angle lay a little bit more flat. You want to take your background pieces for the top, and you want to make sure that the lines that you have drawn are going in opposite directions to create the top peak of your heart half. That's a lot of H's right there. All right, so again, this one is going to go top left to bottom right, and then top right to bottom left, opposite of each other. And it's the same on both halves of this, so there's not really a lot of directionality other than on the same half, you're gonna make sure that those two diagonal lines are going opposite of each other. Again, you're gonna sew on those lines and then cut away 1/4 of an inch from each of those sewn lines and press. And again, I do press those seams open. And then you're going to end up with two heart halves that look just like that. So the next thing that we're gonna do to finish assembling our heart is just put these two halves right sides together. And I try to line up my angles here so that I have nice sharp points on my heart. And again, you're gonna sew right along this line, this seam using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then for one last seam, I press that open, and then you finish with a heart block that looks like this. To make the 9-patch block, you're going to start by cutting out all of the fabric pieces for your 9-patch block. Now, again, if we're dealing with a directional fabric here, like the stripes on this striped fabric here, then you want to make sure that you have cut them according to the directions. Half you'll cut the width and length one way, the other half you'll do the opposite way in order to make sure the directionality is all the same. If you were using a non-directional fabric, you can just cut them all the exact same way and it won't matter. But in this case, where we wanted the bias to all be going the same direction through the whole block, I made sure that I did half one direction, half the other direction. Once you have them all cut out, then you're going to arrange them in your rows. You're going to have your wide pieces on the top and bottom, and then your tall pieces on the left and right. Place your cornerstones and your center block. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to sew them together into the 3 different rows. And again, we're just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then your rows are going to look like this. Now, I am doing these kind of opposite of what I traditionally do. Whichever way you decide to do it, light on the outsides or light for the cornerstones, you will want to press your seam allowances towards the darker fabric. And if you do that, then you will have nesting seams either way. So in this case, I have pressed my seam allowances all towards the red. Once I have my 3 rows all sewn together, and this is a great time to use chain piecing and just set the stacks of them up next to your sewing machine and then just start running all of the rows through and then adding on the other side. It helps you get through all of these 5 9-patch blocks really quickly. So once you have all of your rows sewn together, then we're going to sew each row to each other to create our block. Now, the reason that we have pressed our seam allowances opposite directions, always towards the red, is so that when I flip these and put them right sides together, I can, again, nest my seams. And usually what I'll do is you can kind of just slide it with your fingers until you feel those seams nesting right next to each other. And then I will put a pin right in that seam to hold it in place on both sides here. That way, when I sew across that seam, I can make sure that those points come out nice and sharp. Then once you have pressed these seams, I do press open, even though on the rows I've pressed them in one direction. So you're gonna sew those 3 rows together, and then you will end up with your 9-patch block. If you are making just the 12-inch mini quilt or the small version of the mini quilt, I'm going to move on and show you how to add the borders. If you are making the table topper version, there are two different variations of that table topper version. One uses just the inner borders as the sashing, and the other one uses both sets of borders and makes a little bit bigger table topper. Today I'm going to walk you through to make the large table topper, and then I'll just kind of mention different steps if you're just going to do the small version. So if we're doing the mini quilt, we are going to take our heart block and we are going to add our inner border to the top and bottom. You're going to take 2 more border pieces and add your cornerstones, and then you will sew those on either side of your heart block. And then it will look like this. And then you are going to repeat those same steps, only this time you're going to use the outer borders. So again, you're going to sew one on the top and the bottom. You're going to take 2 of your outer borders and add cornerstones, and then you will add those on either side. And then your finished heart mini quilt is going to look like that. Then you can take this and make your quilt sandwich, quilt it, bind it however you like. And this makes a really fun display piece to use in a gallery wall, or if you have a little quilt stand. These are really fun to add to your seasonal decor. To make the table topper, you're going to begin by making 4 of your heart blocks and 5 of your 9-patch blocks. Once you have all of those blocks done, we're going to begin by arranging our blocks into 3 rows of 3 blocks. Now, I don't have a ton of room with my video setup, so I'm just going to show you 1 row at a time, and it's going to be the same whether you're making the large version or the small version of this table topper. The only difference is if you're making the large version, you're going to be using blocks that already have the inner sashing or border around them. And if you are making the smaller version, you are going to be using this inner border as the sashing and just working with the simple heart or 9-patch blocks without any border sewn around them. So the layout is the same, the assembly is the same. The only thing that's different is the size of block you're working with, whether you're working with the larger version or the smaller. So you are going to have 2 rows that are going to look like this: a 9-patch, a heart, and a 9-patch. For these blocks, you are going to sew your border pieces on the tops and bottoms of your 3 blocks first. You are also going to need 4 of your borders with cornerstones sewn on them for each row, so a total of 8. So once you have sewn your border on the tops and bottoms of your 3 blocks, then you're going to add this sashing with the cornerstones on the outsides of the row and in between the blocks. Once you have that done for both rows, the top and the bottom, now we're going to build our middle row, which is going to be just a little bit different. So let me clear these out of the way. And our middle row is going to have 2 heart blocks and a 9-patch block. Now, if you are doing, we've talked about this a little bit, if you're going to have your larger version, your table topper, and use it as a wall hanging instead, then you're going to want to orient all of your hearts the same direction. If, however, you are making a table topper version, you may want to just turn your heart blocks so that they are all facing out from your table topper, so that when it's sitting on your table, all of the hearts are facing out. It's just a matter of preference. It doesn't change anything other than just how you orient them as you lay out your blocks. For this row, we are going to lay out our blocks, and then we are just going to take our sashing pieces and sew them in between each of the blocks and then on either end. So we'll have 2 rows with sashing all around and cornerstones, and then this 1 row that only has the sashing in between. And then to finish up our table topper, all we have to do is sew those 3 rows together. You're going to want to pay attention to the seams and make sure that they are lined up as well as you can. It may be useful to press some of these seams open to reduce some of the bulk, or to make sure that you're paying attention and you're pressing seams towards the sashing so that as you layer them together, they nest. Once you have all of that done, you're going to give your table topper quilt top a good press, And then again, you can make your quilt sandwich with your batting and your backing, quilt it as you like, and then bind it and your table topper is done. I hope you've enjoyed this pattern. This is a super fun and straightforward pattern. I have a whole series of these fun 12-inch patterns of mini quilts. If you make a mini quilt stand, or if you can find one at a quilt shop, or to use in gallery walls, it's fun to have a little seasonal element to change out. And all of these patterns come with additional project tutorials, whether it's a table topper like this version or a pillow. They are all really fun projects and fun, quick, easy to sew. So if you've enjoyed this framed heart mini quilt and table topper pattern, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. Give this video a like, and I will see you next time. And until then, happy sewing, my friends.